The silence after the barrage was worse than the noise. Marek lay flat against the earth, his face pressed into frozen leaves and mud, lungs burning as he forced himself to breathe slowly, quietly. Around him, the forest that had been their shelter just moments ago was now a graveyard of splintered pines and smoking craters. The acrid stench of cordite mixed with the sickly sweet smell of blood and torn flesh. He lifted his head cautiously. Through the haze of smoke and settling dust, he could make out shapes, bodies, some moving, some terrifyingly still. His ears rang with a high-pitched whine that wouldn't stop, muffling everything else into a distant, underwater murmur. "Volkov!" The voice cut through the ringing. Marek turned his head and saw Private Dennis Kovar crawling toward him, his face streaked with dirt and blood from a gash across his forehead. The kid couldn't have been more than 19, fresh-faced despite the grime, eyes wide with barely controlled panic. "Volkov, what do we do?" Dennis's voice cracked. Marek pushed himself up onto his elbows, then to his knees, forcing his body to obey despite the trembling in his limbs. "What do we do?" The question hung in the air like the smoke around them. He didn't have an answer. He was a sergeant, yes, but only because someone had to be. Only because the men who should have been leading them were dead or missing. He scanned the devastation. Bodies lay scattered among the torn earth. Some wore their uniforms, some didn't. The explosion had been that violent, stripping away everything, even identity. Marek counted quickly. 8 men down, maybe more hidden in the smoke. "Form up," he shouted, his voice hoarse. "Anyone alive, sound off." One by one, voices emerged from the chaos. "Here! Corporal Petrov, here! I'm hit, but I'm here!" Marek counted 13 responses, 13 out of 23. His stomach turned, but he forced the feeling down. No time for that. No time for grief or shock or the terrible mathematics of loss. He moved through the smoke, checking bodies, pulling the living to their feet, searching for weapons and ammunition. His hands moved mechanically. Check pulse, grab rifle, strip magazines, move on. Don't think. Don't feel. Just move. Lieutenant Stasov was dead. Marek found him near what had been their command post, his chest torn open by shrapnel, eyes staring unseeing at the gray sky above. The radio beside him was destroyed, crushed under a fallen tree. Their link to command, to the rest of the battalion, gone. "Marek!" Corporal Anton Petrov appeared beside him, a stocky man with a thick beard and steady eyes. He was the oldest among them, maybe 35, a veteran of border skirmishes before this war had erupted into something bigger, something none of them had been prepared for. "We need to move. Now." "I know. They'll be coming to confirm the kill. Standard protocol." Marek nodded. Anton was right. The enemy didn't just bomb and leave. They sent troops to sweep, to finish off survivors, to salvage equipment. They had minutes, maybe less. He stood, his knees protesting, and raised his voice. "Listen up. Grab what you can carry. Weapons, ammunition, medical supplies. We move in 2 minutes. Anyone too wounded to walk, we carry. Nobody gets left behind." The words came out with more authority than he felt, but the men responded. Training took over where courage faltered. They moved with purpose, stripping the dead of anything useful, helping the wounded to their feet. Private Yuri Malikov, a tall, gangly kid with nervous hands, appeared carrying 2 rifles and a pack bulging with magazines. "Sergeant, where are we going?" Where indeed? Marek pulled out his compass, then his crumpled map. The paper was smudged with dirt and blood, his, someone else's, but still legible. He oriented himself, tracing their position. They'd been dug in along a ridgeline overlooking the valley, part of a defensive line stretching north to south. But that line was gone now. The bombardment had been too sudden, too overwhelming. He studied the map, his finger tracing possible routes. Behind them, east, enemy territory, getting deeper with every kilometer. Ahead, west. That's where their lines should be, where friendly forces should be holding. But should be didn't mean much anymore. "West," he decided. "Back to our lines." "If there are any lines left," someone muttered. Marek didn't respond to that, couldn't, because the same thought had already crossed his mind. 2 minutes, Anton called out, moving among the men with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. you can't carry it, leave it. We're going fast and light." They assembled in a loose formation, 13 men, half of them wounded to some degree. Marek did a quick inventory: 4 rifles, 3 submachine guns, 2 light machine guns, a handful of grenades, and ammunition that wouldn't last more than one serious engagement. Medical supplies were limited to a single aid kit salvaged from Stasov's pack, not much to fight a war with. "Move out," Marek ordered. "Spread formation, 5-meter intervals. Anton, take point. Yuri, rear guard. Stay alert." They moved into the forest, leaving behind the dead and the remnants of everything they'd known. The trees closed around them, offering cover but also concealment for any enemy that might be hunting them. Every shadow could hide a threat. Every sound could be the enemy closing in. The terrain was rough, steep hills covered in dense pine forest, cut through by narrow ravines and rocky streams. In summer, it would have been difficult. In late autumn, with frost hardening the ground and mist clinging to the valleys, it was brutal. They'd been walking for maybe 20 minutes when Anton raised his fist, the signal to halt. Everyone froze, weapons coming up, eyes scanning the forest. Marek crept forward to where Anton crouched behind a fallen log, his rifle aimed at something ahead. "What is it?" "Movement. 200 meters, 11 o'clock. Marek followed Anton's gaze. At first he saw nothing but trees and mist. Then, there. A flicker of movement, a shape passing between the pines. Then another. Then more. "Patrol," Anton whispered. "Squad strength, maybe more." Marek's mind raced. They could try to hide, let the patrol pass. But if they were spotted, a firefight here would draw every enemy soldier within a kilometer. They could try to ambush, but with limited ammunition and wounded men, the odds weren't good. "Fall back," he whispered, slowly, quietly. They withdrew like ghosts, each man moving with exaggerated care, testing every step before committing weight. Marek counted seconds in his head, measuring distance. 50 meters, 75, 100. A branch snapped. The sound was small, insignificant, just Private Alexei Sokolov's boot catching on deadfall. But in the heavy silence of the forest, it might as well have been a gunshot. Shouting erupted from where the patrol had been. Orders in a language Marek didn't speak but understood nonetheless. They'd been heard. "Run!" he hissed. The forest exploded into motion. The squad scattered into the trees, abandoning stealth for speed. Behind them, voices grew louder, closer. Then the first shots rang out, sharp cracks that echoed through the forest, followed by the angry buzz of bullets cutting through branches overhead. Marek ran, his lungs burning, his rifle clutched tight against his chest. Around him, his men crashed through the undergrowth, fear lending them speed they didn't know they had. More shots. A cry of pain. Who? He didn't dare look back. The forest floor dropped away suddenly, and Marek found himself sliding down a steep embankment, loose rocks and dirt cascading around him. He hit the bottom hard, rolled, came up running. Others tumbled down behind him. Anton, Denise, Yuri, more. "Ravine!" Anton gasped. "This way!" They followed the ravine, using it as cover, the steep sides concealing them from view. The shouts and gunfire continued above, but more distant now, searching. They ran until their legs gave out, until even fear couldn't push them any further. Finally, Marek called a halt in a dense thicket where the ravine curved sharply, offering concealment on 3 sides. The men collapsed, gasping for air, shaking with adrenaline. Marek forced himself to count. 11. They'd lost 2 more. "Sound off," he ordered between ragged breaths. "Wounded?" Private Victor Ruslan held up his arm, blood seeping through his fingers where a bullet had grazed his bicep. "Just a scratch," he said, though his face was pale. "Anyone else?" Silence. No one else had been hit. Small mercy. "Sokolov and Gregor," Anton said quietly, answering the question Marek hadn't asked. "Didn't make it down the embankment." Marek closed his eyes briefly. 2 more names to add to the list he was keeping, whether he wanted to or not. "We can't stop long," he said. "They know we're here. They'll be looking." "Let them look," Private Dmitry Koval said, his voice bitter. Dmitry was short and stocky, with a perpetual scowl that had only deepened since the bombardment. "What's the point, Marek? We're cut off. No radio, no support. We should find a hole and hide until this blows over. Hide where? Marek shot back. This is their territory now. There's nowhere to hide. Better than running ourselves to death. Enough. Anton's voice cut through the rising argument. We're soldiers, not rabbits. We keep moving west. That's the mission. Mission? Dmitri laughed, a harsh, broken sound. What mission? The mission was to hold the line. The line doesn't exist anymore. Marek stepped forward, getting into Dmitri's face. The mission is to survive and rejoin our forces. That's what we're going to do. And if there are no forces left to rejoin? The question hung in the air, ugly and unavoidable. What if the entire front had collapsed? What if they were the last? Then we make it anyway, Marek said firmly. Because that's what soldiers do. We don't quit. We don't surrender. We fight until we can't fight anymore, and then we fight some more. Dmitri held his gaze for a long moment, then looked away, muttering something under his breath. But he didn't argue further. They rested for 15 minutes, binding Victor's wound with strips torn from a dead man's shirt, redistributing ammunition to balance the load. Marek studied his map again, trying to make sense of their position. The ravine ran roughly northwest, not exactly the direction they wanted, but close enough. We follow the ravine for another kilometer, he decided. Then we cut west through the forest. With luck, we can put some distance between us and any patrols. With luck, Dmitri muttered. They moved out again, this time more cautiously, every sense alert for danger. The ravine provided good cover but also trapped them. If they encountered enemy forces in here, there would be no room to maneuver, nowhere to run. The day wore on. Gray clouds hung low overhead, promising rain or perhaps snow. The temperature dropped steadily, and Marek realized with growing concern that they had almost no cold weather gear. Most of it had been lost in the bombardment, along with their rations, water purification tablets, and sleeping rolls. Cold, hungry, hunted. The Trinity of Misery. They emerged from the ravine in late afternoon, climbing up onto higher ground, where the forest thinned and rocky outcroppings broke through the soil. From here, Marek could see down into a valley where a small village sat huddled against the landscape, maybe 20 houses, a church with a damaged steeple, fields lying fallow and overgrown. Smoke, Anton observed, pointing. Someone's there. Marek saw it too. Thin wisps rising from a few chimneys. Civilians, probably. Maybe friendly, maybe not. In war, loyalties shifted like sand. We go around, he decided. We should check it out, Yuri said. Maybe they have food, water. We need supplies. Too risky. We don't know whose side they're on. Does anyone even have sides anymore? This from Private Leonid Markov, a quiet man who'd barely spoken since the bombardment. Maybe they're just trying to survive, like us. Marek considered. Yuri and Leonid had a point. They did need supplies. But walking into an unknown village was a gamble, and they'd already used up most of their luck. Before he could decide, Denise, who'd been watching the village through borrowed binoculars, spoke up. Movement. Trucks. 3 of them, coming from the east. Marek took the binoculars, focused on the road leading into the village. Sure enough, 3 military trucks were approaching, kicking up dust despite the dampness in the air. As they got closer, he could make out the markings. Enemy. Everyone down, he hissed. They pressed themselves into the rocks and sparse vegetation, making themselves as small as possible. Through the binoculars, Marek watched as the trucks rolled into the village square and disgorged soldiers, 20, maybe 25, all armed, all alert. An officer emerged shouting orders. Villagers began to appear, hesitant, fearful. The officer barked questions. An old man stepped forward, gesturing, explaining something. Marek couldn't hear the words, but he could read body language. The old man was pleading, hands spread in supplication. The officer listened, then pulled out a pistol and shot him. Just like that. One moment the old man was talking, the next he was crumpling to the ground, blood spreading across the dirt. A woman screamed. The soldiers moved through the village with brutal efficiency, dragging people from their homes, lining them up against the church wall. More questions, more pleas, more gunshots. "We have to do something," Denise whispered, his voice strangled with horror and rage. "What?" Marek asked, never taking his eyes from the scene below. We're 11 men with barely enough ammunition for one firefight. They're twice our number, better armed, and in a defensive position. So we just watch. Yes. The word tasted like ash, but Marek forced it out. We watch, and we remember, and we survive to fight another day. That's not right, Dennis insisted, his young face twisted with anguish. No, Marek agreed. It's not, but it's reality. They watched for another 10 minutes as the enemy soldiers looted the village, taking whatever they wanted: food, valuables, even clothing. Bodies lay in the square, maybe a dozen. The survivors were herded into one of the houses, guarded. Finally, the soldiers climbed back into their trucks and left, heading west, the same direction Marek's squad needed to go. Silence settled over the village, broken only by distant sobbing. Now what? Anton asked quietly. Marek lowered the binoculars, his jaw tight. Part of him wanted to go down there, to help the survivors, to bury the dead. But another part, the part that had to think tactically, that had to keep his men alive, knew they couldn't afford the delay or the exposure. We go around, he said, wide berth. We can't help them, and they can't help us. We could at least, but no. Marek's voice was iron. Our responsibility is to ourselves right now, to each other. That's all we can handle. Then the men didn't argue, but Marek could see the judgment in some of their eyes. He accepted it. Leadership meant making hard choices, and hard choices meant living with condemnation. They skirted the village, giving it a wide margin, moving through the forest in a state of hyper-alert tension. Every sound was magnified, every shadow a potential threat. The image of that old man falling, of the bodies piled against the church wall, played on repeat in Marek's mind. This is what we're fighting, he reminded himself. This is why we can't give up. As darkness fell, they found shelter in an abandoned barn, its roof half-caved but offering some protection from the wind that had picked up, carrying the promise of rain. They posted guards in 2-hour shifts and settled in for a miserable night. Marek couldn't sleep. He sat with his back against the barn wall, his rifle across his knees, listening to the sounds of the night. Wind in the eaves, the occasional cough or groan from his wounded men, the skitter of rats in the straw. Anton sat down beside him, silent for a while, then said, "You made the right call. At the village." "Did I?" "Yes. Going down there wouldn't have changed anything, except maybe getting us all killed. Maybe that would have been better. At least we would have died doing something that mattered. Surviving matters." Anton's voice was firm. "Getting back to our lines matters. Living to fight another day matters. Don't let guilt make you reckless, Marek." "I'm not their sergeant because I'm qualified," Marek said quietly. "I'm their sergeant because everyone else is dead. And yet you're doing the job. Making the calls, keeping them alive." Anton paused. "That counts for something." Marek didn't respond. He wasn't sure he believed that, but he appreciated Anton trying. The night passed slowly, measured in the rotation of guards and the gradual shift from darkness to the gray half-light that preceded dawn. When they finally moved out, stiff and cold and hungry, Marek consulted his map one more time. They'd covered maybe 15 kilometers in the past 24 hours. If the front line was where it should be, they still had at least 40 kilometers to go. Maybe more if they had to keep detouring around enemy patrols and villages. 40 kilometers. In hostile territory. With no food, little ammunition, and winter coming on. The odds weren't good, but they were still alive, still moving, still fighting. That would have to be enough. The second day was harder than the first. Hunger gnawed at their bellies, making them weak and irritable. They found a stream and refilled their canteens, but without purification tablets, they risked dysentery. Drink contaminated water or die of dehydration. Some choice. They drank. By mid-afternoon, they encountered another patrol. This time, there was no avoiding it. The enemy soldiers appeared suddenly from behind a rise, and both groups froze, equally surprised. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. 11 exhausted, starving soldiers facing 7 enemy troops. The mathematics of violence hung in the air. Then someone, Marek never knew who, fired. The fight was brief, brutal, and chaotic. Gunfire shattered the stillness, bullets cracking through the air, men shouting and screaming. Mark fired in controlled bursts, dropping one soldier, then another. Beside him, Anton's submachine gun chattered, brass casings arcing through the air. It was over in less than a minute. 7 enemy soldiers lay dead or dying. On Marek's side, Private Leonid Markov sat against a tree, clutching his stomach, blood seeping through his fingers. "Medic," he gasped. "I need a medic." But they had no medic. Just Denis with his half-remembered training and a nearly empty aid kit. Dennis worked frantically, trying to stem the bleeding, but Marek could see it was futile. The wound was too severe, too deep. Leonid was dying, and they all knew it. "I'm sorry," Dennis kept saying, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." "Not your fault," Leonid managed, his voice weak. "Just don't leave me here. Don't let them find me." "We won't," Marek promised, kneeling beside the dying man. "You have my word." Leonid died 20 minutes later, as the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days, painting the forest gold. They buried him in a shallow grave, marking it with stones, knowing it would probably be disturbed by animals or enemy soldiers, but doing it anyway because it was all they could offer. 10 men left. They took what they could from the dead enemy soldiers: ammunition, rations, a real medical kit, small victories in a losing war. "How much further?" Dmitri asked as they prepared to move out. His voice was hollow, defeated. Marek checked the map. "Maybe 30 kilometers, 2 days if we push hard. If we don't run into more patrols." "If we don't run into more patrols," Marek agreed. They walked in silence after that, each man lost in his own thoughts, his own fears. The forest seemed to press in around them, hostile and unforgiving. Every step was an effort, every kilometer a battle against exhaustion and despair. As evening approached, they found themselves on a ridgeline overlooking a river valley. The river itself was too wide to cross easily, but Marek's map showed a bridge about 5 kilometers south. "That's our way across," he said, pointing. They approached the bridge cautiously as night fell, moving through the shadows like ghosts. The bridge was old, built of stone and iron, spanning the dark water below. And it was guarded. Enemy soldiers, maybe a dozen, had set up a checkpoint on the western side, the side Marek needed to reach. Trucks were parked nearby, and a machine gun nest commanded the approach. "We can't go through that," Yuri whispered. "We can't go around it either," Anton observed. "Next bridge is 20 kilometers downstream, and who knows if it's even standing." Marek studied the situation, his mind working through options. A frontal assault would be suicide. Trying to swim the river in November was equally fatal. Waiting for the guard to change might give them an opening, but it might also expose them to a dawn patrol. Then he saw it. Upstream, maybe a kilometer, the river narrowed considerably where it ran through a rocky gorge. The water would be faster there, more dangerous, but also shallower, potentially wadeable. "There," he said, pointing. "We cross there." "In the dark?" Dennis asked. "Marek, that's crazy. We could drown." "We cross there," Marek repeated, his voice flat and final. "Or we surrender. Those are the only options." Nobody argued with that. They moved upstream, keeping to the trees, alert for patrols. The gorge was even more treacherous up close, white water rushing over rocks, the current swift and merciless. But it was only about 20 meters wide, and in a few places the water looked no more than waist deep, looked being the operative word. "We rope up," Anton suggested. "Single file. If someone loses their footing, the others can hold them." They had maybe 15 meters of rope, salvaged from various packs. It would have to do. Marek went first, the rope tied around his waist, his rifle held above his head. The water hit him like a physical blow, ice cold, shockingly powerful. His feet slipped on the rocks below, and only the rope, held tight by Anton and Yuri on the shore, kept him from being swept away. Step by agonizing step, he crossed. The water rose to his chest at the deepest point, so cold it felt like knives stabbing into his lungs. His legs went numb. His fingers lost all feeling, but he kept moving, driven by will alone. When he finally hauled himself up onto the far bank, shaking uncontrollably, teeth chattering so hard he thought they might break, he wanted nothing more than to collapse. But he couldn't. He had to help the others across. One by one, they came. Denise, shaking like a leaf. Yuri, cursing steadily under his breath. Victor, his wounded arm held awkwardly above the water. Each crossing was a fight against the river, against the cold, against the fundamental unfairness of a world that demanded so much and gave so little in return. They made it. All 10 of them, soaked and freezing and on the edge of hypothermia, but alive, across. "We need fire," Anton said through chattering teeth. "Now, or we die of exposure." Marek knew he was right, but he also knew that fire was a beacon, a signal to every enemy patrol within kilometers. But what choice did they have? "Find shelter," he ordered. "Something out of sight. We'll risk a small fire, just enough to dry out and warm up." They found a hollow beneath an overhang, hidden from casual view, and built the smallest fire they dared, just enough heat to stave off death. They huddled around it, steam rising from their wet clothes, their bodies slowly, painfully returning to some semblance of warmth. 10, Dmitri said suddenly. "We started with 23. Now we're 10. "We're still here," Marek said. "For how long?" Marek didn't answer. He didn't have an answer. All he had was the stubborn, irrational certainty that giving up was not an option, not while he could still move, still think, still fight. They would reach their lines. They would survive. They had to. Because if they didn't, if all this suffering, all this loss, all this sacrifice meant nothing, then what was the point of any of it? The fire burned low as the night deepened. Tomorrow they would move again, would cover more ground, would get closer to safety or death or whatever waited for them in the west. But tonight, they were alive. And sometimes, Mark was learning, that was all you could ask for. Dawn came gray and bitter, frost clinging to the earth like broken glass. Marek woke to find Denis already up, standing watch at the edge of their shelter, his young face drawn and haggard in the weak light. The fire had died to ash hours ago, and the cold had crept back in, settling into their bones with cruel persistence. "Anything?" Marek asked, his voice rough with sleep and cold. Denis shook his head. "Quiet. Too quiet, maybe." Marek knew what he meant. In war, silence was often more unnerving than gunfire. It meant you didn't know where the enemy was, what they were planning, when they might strike. The others stirred, groaning as frozen joints protested movement. Anton checked the weapons while Marek inventoried their supplies. 3 cans of enemy rations salvaged from yesterday's fight. A half-liter of water in each canteen. Ammunition for maybe one more sustained engagement. The medical kit, now significantly depleted. Not enough. Not nearly enough. "We move in 10 minutes, Marek announced. "Check your gear. Help your buddy. We've got ground to cover." Dmitri sat hunched against the rock wall, his face pale beneath the grime. "I can't feel my feet," he said flatly. "You will once we start moving. Get up." "What's the point, Marek? We're just delaying the inevitable." Marek walked over and crouched in front of him. "The point is that we're still breathing. The point is that every kilometer we cover is 1 kilometer closer to home. The point is that we don't quit. Not now. Not ever. Now get on your feet, soldier." For a moment, Dmitri just stared at him, something dark and broken flickering in his eyes. Then slowly, he pushed himself upright, wincing as circulation returned to his legs. They moved out into the forest, heading west with the rising sun at their backs. The terrain was gentler here, rolling hills covered in mixed forest, pine and birch and oak. Under different circumstances, it might have been beautiful. Now it was just another obstacle, another stretch of hostile ground to cross. They'd been walking for maybe an hour when Yuri, ranging ahead as scout, came running back, his breath coming in sharp gasps. "Village," he reported. "Half a kilometer ahead. Occupied." Marek called a halt and moved forward with Anton and Yuri to reconnoiter. They crawled the last 100 meters on their bellies, easing up to the edge of the tree line where they could observe without being seen. The village was larger than the last one, maybe 40 buildings clustered around a central square with a well. But it was the vehicles that caught Marek's attention. 4 trucks parked near what looked like a commandeered town hall, soldiers moving in and out with the casual efficiency of an established occupation. "Supply depot," Anton observed. "They're using it as a staging point." Marek counted soldiers, 15 visible, probably more inside. Too many to fight directly, but the trucks represented something valuable: fuel, food, ammunition, maybe even communications equipment. We go around, he decided. Wait. Anton grabbed his arm. Look at the trucks, the third one. See the markings? Marek squinted. The truck had red crosses painted on its canvas sides. Medical transport. Medical supplies, Anton corrected. Real bandages, antiseptics, maybe even morphine. Victor's wound is getting infected, and Denise has been coughing blood since yesterday. We need those supplies. Marek knew Anton was right, but the tactical part of his brain was screaming warnings. It's too risky. That's a fortified position with superior numbers. So we hit them smart instead of hard, Anton said. We've been running for 3 days. Maybe it's time we stopped running and started fighting back. The words hung in the cold air between them. Fighting back. Not just surviving, but actively resisting, taking something from the enemy instead of constantly losing. What are you thinking? Marek asked carefully. Anton's eyes gleamed with something that might have been excitement or might have been madness. In war, the two were often indistinguishable. We wait until nightfall. Then we take that medical truck and anything else we can carry. That's not a plan. That's suicide. It's a plan if we do it right. Look at the layout. The trucks are parked on the east side, away from the main barracks. Guards posted, sure, but we've got the element of surprise. We go in fast, hit hard, and disappear before they can organize a response. Marek studied the village again, this time looking at it not as an obstacle to avoid, but as a target to exploit. Anton was right about the layout. The trucks were relatively isolated. If they could neutralize the guards quietly, they might have a chance, but it was still a massive risk. If anything went wrong, they'd be trapped in the middle of an enemy stronghold with nowhere to run. I need to think about this, he said finally. They withdrew back to where the rest of the squad waited. Marek gathered them together and laid out Anton's proposal, watching their faces as he spoke. Some showed fear, others determination. A few looked almost relieved at the prospect of hitting back instead of just running. It's a vote, Marek said. We're in this together, so we decide together. Who's in favor? 5 hands went up immediately. Then Yuri raised his, followed by Denis, 8 out of 10. Dmitri kept his hands down, but he said, if we're doing this, I'm not sitting it out. Might as well die fighting as freeze to death in the woods. That left only Private Nikolai Orlov, a thin, nervous man who'd barely spoken since the bombardment. He looked around at the others, then slowly nodded. Okay, I'm in. Then we plan, Marek said, and we do this right. They spent the rest of the day observing the village, noting patrol patterns, shift changes, the movement of personnel. Marek sketched a rough layout in the dirt, marking key positions, the trucks, the barracks, probable guard posts. We split into 3 teams, he proposed. Team 1, me, Anton, and Yuri. We take out the guards and secure the medical truck. Team 2, Dmitri, Victor, and Denis. You provide overwatch from here, cover our withdrawal. Team 3, Nikolai, Alexei, and Pavel. You're our quick reaction force. If things go bad, you create a diversion here, draw them away from our escape route. What about transportation? Dennis asked. Even if we get the truck, can any of us drive it? Silence. None of them had mentioned that rather critical detail. I can, Victor said quietly. My father had a truck. I grew up driving it. With one good arm? Dmitri asked skeptically. Victor shrugged. Guess we'll find out. As darkness fell, they moved into position. Marek felt his heart hammering against his ribs, adrenaline singing through his veins. This was different from the desperate firefights they'd stumbled into before. This was planned, deliberate. This was them choosing to fight. The village settled into night routines. Lights appeared in windows. Guards changed shifts with visible weariness. Somewhere someone was cooking. The smell of food drifted through the cold air, making Marek's stomach clench with hunger. Ready? Anton whispered beside him. Marek checked his watch. 2,300 hours. Time. Move! They ghost-walked through the darkness, using every shadow, every patch of cover. The village was laid out in a rough grid, and they approached from the south, staying low, moving slow. Patience was survival. The first guard was leaning against the truck, smoking, his rifle slung carelessly over his shoulder. He never saw Anton coming. One moment he was there, the next Anton had him in a chokehold, squeezing until the soldier went limp. They dragged the body into the shadows. One down. The second guard was more alert, pacing a circuit around the trucks. Marek timed his pattern, 15 seconds per circuit, 5-second pause at each end. When the guard turned his back, Marek moved, crossing the open ground in a sprint, his knife already drawn. The guard started to turn, some instinct warning him, but Marek was already there, one hand clamping over his mouth, the knife finding the soft spot beneath his jaw. The guard struggled for a moment, then went still. 2 down. Yuri appeared with the bolt cutters they'd salvaged days ago. He went to work on the chain securing the medical truck while Marek and Anton cleared the immediate area. No other guards visible. So far, impossibly, the plan was working. The chain snapped with a sound that seemed deafening in the quiet night. They all froze, weapons ready, waiting for the alarm. Nothing. "Victor, get up here," Marek hissed into the darkness. Victor appeared from the shadows, moving quickly despite his wounded arm. He climbed into the truck's cab, felt around for the ignition. "No keys," he whispered down. "Can you hotwire it?" "Maybe. Give me a minute." A minute. In a hostile village, with enemy soldiers sleeping 20 meters away. Marek positioned himself at the corner of the truck, his rifle trained on the barracks. Beside him, Anton and Yuri did the same, creating a 3-sided defensive perimeter. The seconds crawled by like hours. Every sound was amplified. The scrape of metal on metal as Victor worked, the distant bark of a dog, voices from inside one of the buildings. Then light blazed from the barracks doorway. A soldier emerged, stretching, heading toward the latrine. "We've got movement," Marek breathed. The soldier was walking casually, unaware, not yet seeing the bodies in the shadows or the intruders by his truck. 15 meters away. 10. The engine coughed to life. The soldier's head snapped around, his eyes going wide as he processed what he was seeing. His mouth opened to shout an alarm. Marek fired. The suppressed rifle coughed once, twice. The soldier dropped, but the damage was done. The sound of the engine starting, the sight of him raising his weapon, someone had to have noticed. "Go, go, go!" Marek shouted, abandoning stealth. Yuri vaulted into the back of the truck. Anton ran for the passenger side. Marek provided covering fire as lights blazed in windows and voices started shouting. The truck lurched forward, Victor grinding the gears, finding first, then second. Marek ran alongside, firing back at the barracks as soldiers poured out, some still pulling on uniforms, all reaching for weapons. Bullets cracked through the air. Something tugged at Marek's sleeve. A near miss. He kept running, kept firing, his magazine emptying in controlled bursts. Anton was leaning out the passenger window, firing his submachine gun, the muzzle flash lighting up his face in strobing snapshots. The truck picked up speed, bouncing over the rough ground. "Marek!" Anton shouted, extending his hand. Marek grabbed it and let himself be hauled up and into the cab, his legs dangling out the door as Victor accelerated. Behind them, the village erupted in chaos, soldiers firing wildly, officers screaming orders, an alarm bell clanging. They hit the main road doing 40 kilometers an hour, the old truck protesting every bump and pothole. Marek pulled himself fully inside and slammed the door shut, breathing hard, his ears ringing from gunfire. "Everyone okay?" "Alive," Victor grunted, wrestling with the steering wheel. "Where to?" "West. Just west. Away from here." They drove for 10 minutes before Marek ordered Victor to pull over at a predetermined rendezvous point. The rest of the squad emerged from the forest, eyes wide with exhilaration and fear. "You beautiful, crazy bastards," Dmitri said, something like respect in his voice. "You actually did it." "What did we get?" Dennis asked, already climbing into the back of the truck. Marek joined him, using a small flashlight to survey their prize. Wooden crates stamped with medical markings, canvas bags filled with supplies. And there, in the corner, 3 jerry cans of fuel. Dennis pried open one of the crates and let out a low whistle. Bandages, antiseptics, morphine, sulfa powder, surgical kits. This is a full field hospital's worth of supplies. "We just became the best equipped squad behind enemy lines," Anton observed. We also just made every soldier in that village very angry, Marek countered. They'll be hunting us now, actively. Let them hunt, Yuri said, a fierce grin on his young face. At least now we can fight back. But as they drove through the night, the initial rush of victory fading into the steady grind of vigilance, Marek couldn't shake the weight settling over him. They'd won this round, yes. They'd taken supplies they desperately needed, but they'd also escalated. They were no longer just stragglers trying to slip through enemy lines. They were raiders, thieves, legitimate targets for retribution. The war had changed for them. Or maybe they'd changed for the war. They ditched the truck an hour before dawn, pushing it into a ravine where it wouldn't be easily spotted from the air, and continued on foot. The medical supplies were distributed among them, the weight both literal and metaphorical, proof that they could strike back, but also a reminder of the cost. Victor tended to his own wound properly for the first time in days, cleaning it, applying antiseptic that made him hiss through clenched teeth, wrapping it in clean bandages. Dennis dosed himself with sulfa powder for the lung infection he'd been hiding, the one that had been turning his coughs bloody. They were stronger now, better equipped. But the enemy would be looking for them with renewed purpose. The next 2 days passed in a blur of forced marches and near misses. Twice they spotted enemy patrols and had to detour, losing precious time. Once they heard trucks on a nearby road and had to hide in a drainage ditch for 3 hours while enemy forces moved north in strength, reinforcements heading to some battle they could only imagine. The terrain grew rougher, the weather colder. On the 4th night after the raid, snow began to fall, thick, heavy flakes that turned the world white and muffled all sound. Beautiful and deadly. They took shelter in an abandoned farmhouse, its roof mostly intact, its walls offering protection from the wind. As the others slept or kept watch, Marek sat by a small, carefully shielded fire, studying his map by flashlight. They'd covered maybe 35 kilometers since the bombardment. That meant they should be getting close to where the front line had been. Should be. But the map was days old, and wars didn't respect cartography. Can't sleep? Anton settled down beside him, his breath misting in the cold air. Thinking. Dangerous habit, Marek almost smiled. We should hit our lines tomorrow, maybe the day after. If there are lines to hit. You think they've fallen back? Anton was quiet for a moment, then said, I think a lot can change in 5 days. I think we won't know what's waiting for us until we get there. And if there's nothing, if the front collapsed completely, then we keep going. Find another unit, another command, something. We didn't come this far to just give up at the finish line. Marek looked at his friend, because that's what Anton had become. Somewhere in the chaos and fear and shared suffering. A friend. Maybe the only real one he had left. The men look at me like I have answers, Marek said quietly. Like I know what I'm doing. And I'm just making it up as I go. Every decision, every order, it's all guesswork. That's leadership, Anton said. Nobody knows what they're doing. The difference is some people make the guesses and take responsibility for them. That's you. Some of those guesses got men killed. Some of those guesses kept men alive. You can't have one without risking the other. That's the price. The fire crackled softly, shadows dancing on the walls. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the world in white silence. I keep thinking about that old man, Marek said. In the village. The one they shot. Don't. We could have done something. We couldn't. And thinking about it now doesn't change that. It just makes you second guess when you need to be decisive. Anton's voice was firm, but not unkind. The only thing that matters is what we do next, not what we did or didn't do before. Maybe he was right. Maybe the only way to survive was to keep moving forward, to not look back at the trail of blood and bodies and impossible choices. Morning brought clearer weather, but no clarity about what lay ahead. They moved out early, pushing hard, knowing that time and luck were both running out. Around mid-morning, they heard it, the distant rumble of artillery. Not the sporadic fire of skirmishing, but sustained bombardment, the kind that meant major forces in contact. That's ours, Yuri said, his voice tight with hope and fear. That's our guns. I know the sound. Marek listened carefully. The kid might be right. the timing, the rhythm, it matched their artillery doctrine. Could be captured guns, Dmitri pointed out, ever the pessimist. Or it could be our lines, Dennis countered, active and fighting. Only one way to find out, Marek said. They moved toward the sound, cautious but quick. The forest began to thin, giving way to more open ground, fields and gentle hills, the kind of terrain that made Marek's tactical sense scream warnings. No cover, nowhere to hide. We go slow, he ordered. Use whatever concealment we can find. Stay spread out. They were crossing a field of dead corn, the stalks brown and brittle, when Victor suddenly dropped to one knee, his good hand raised in a fist, the signal for freeze. Everyone went still, barely breathing. Contact, Victor whispered. North, movement. Marek crawled forward to where Victor crouched, his eyes fixed on something ahead. There, a line of soldiers emerging from the tree line maybe 200 meters away. A lot of soldiers, a full company at least. Marek felt his heart sink as he raised his binoculars and focused. Then it stopped entirely. The uniforms were familiar. The weapons, the gear, the way they moved in formation. His army, his side. That's ours, he breathed. Those are ours. The word spread through the squad like electricity. Men stood up from concealment, some laughing, others crying, all of them giddy with relief. Wait, Anton said sharply. We approach carefully. For all they know, we're the enemy. Let's not get shot by friendly fire after everything else. He was right. Marek had the squad form a tight group, weapons lowered but visible, and they began walking toward the distant formation, hands raised in a gesture of non-aggression. The soldiers ahead saw them and immediately went alert, weapons coming up, orders shouted. Marek kept walking, slow and steady, his hands clearly visible. Identify yourselves, a voice called out in their language, their beautiful, wonderful language. Sergeant Marek Volkov, 2nd Battalion, Echo Company, Marek shouted back. We're friendlies, coming in. A pause. Confusion. Then a figure detached from the formation and walked forward, an officer, captain's insignia on his collar. 2nd Battalion, the captain called. That unit was wiped out 5 days ago. Complete loss. Not complete, Marek replied. We're what's left. They closed the distance, and Marek could see the captain's face now, young, maybe 30, with tired eyes that had seen too much too soon. How many of you? 10, sir. The captain looked past him at the ragged squad, filthy, exhausted, armed with a mix of friendly and enemy weapons, but standing tall nonetheless. You came through enemy territory all the way from the ridge? Yes, sir. My God, the captain said softly, then louder. Get these men water, food, and a medic, now! Soldiers rushed forward, and suddenly Marek was being handed a canteen, actual rations, people checking him for wounds. The squad was surrounded by friendly faces, friendly voices, safety. They'd made it. Against all odds, through all the chaos and fear and death, they'd made it. But as Marek stood there, watching his men finally relax for the first time in days, he felt no triumph, only exhaustion and a hollow ache where relief should have been. Because making it back was just the beginning. The war was still out there. The enemy was still advancing. And somewhere behind them, scattered across hostile territory, were the bodies of 13 men he'd led and couldn't save. The captain was asking questions, wanting to know about enemy positions, strengths, movements. Marek answered mechanically, his mind elsewhere. Your squad will be extracted to the rear, the captain said. You've earned rest. No, sir, Marek heard himself say. Request permission to rejoin active duty. The captain blinked. Sergeant, you just walked through hell. You need medical evaluation, debriefing, recovery time. With respect, sir, my men and I aren't done fighting. He looked back at his squad. They were eating, drinking, some already nodding off despite standing up, but one by one they met his eyes and nodded. Even Dmitri. Even him. We want back in, Marek said. The captain studied him for a long moment, then said, You're either very brave or very broken, Sergeant. Maybe both. He paused. I'll put in the request. But first, you rest. That's an order. Yes, sir. As they were led back to the battalion's temporary position, Marek allowed himself one glance back toward the east, toward the territory they'd crossed, the hell they'd survived. They'd made it out. But part of him knew that a piece of them would always be back there, in those forests and ravines, with the men who'd fallen and the choices that couldn't be unmade. The war had changed them, and there was no going back to who they'd been before. Only forward. Always forward. Rest, as it turned out, was a relative concept. The battalion's temporary position was a fortified farmstead 3 kilometers behind the current defensive line, trenches hastily dug, sandbags stacked around buildings, artillery pieces positioned in the orchards. It wasn't the rear, it wasn't safety, it was just slightly less dangerous than the front. Marek and his squad were given a barn to sleep in, real food from the field kitchen, and an hour with a medic who checked them over with professional efficiency. Victor's arm was properly treated and put in a sling. Dennis received antibiotics for his lung infection. The others had their various cuts, bruises, and cases of trench foot addressed. Then they were left alone, and the silence felt strange after days of constant vigilance. Marek lay on a pile of straw, staring at the barn's rafters, unable to sleep despite the exhaustion that had settled into his bones like lead. Around him, his men were dropping into unconsciousness, some snoring, others twitching with dreams he suspected weren't pleasant. Anton sat nearby, cleaning his weapon with the same methodical care he brought to everything. He caught Marek's eye and gave a slight nod, a gesture that somehow conveyed understanding without words. "You should sleep," Anton said quietly. "So should you. One of us needs to stay alert. Old habits." Marek sat up, running a hand through his matted hair. Even after washing at the field station, he still felt filthy, the grime of the past week having worked its way under his skin in ways water couldn't reach. "Do you think they'll actually let us rejoin?" he asked. Anton shrugged. "Depends on how desperate they are for experienced soldiers. And right now, everyone's desperate." The door to the barn opened, and Captain Sokolov, the officer who'd found them, stepped inside. "Volkov, with me." Marek stood, grabbed his rifle out of instinct, then realized how foolish that must look. He was behind friendly lines now. But his hands didn't seem to believe it, still tight on the weapon as he followed the captain outside. The night was cold and clear, stars brilliant overhead, the kind of sky that made the war seem impossible. Somewhere in the distance, artillery rumbled like distant thunder. "At ease, Sergeant," Sokolov said, pulling out a pack of cigarettes and offering one. Marek took it, though he'd never been much of a smoker. The captain lit both cigarettes, and they stood in companionable silence for a moment, exhaling smoke into the frozen air. "I spoke with command," Sokolov said finally, "about your request to rejoin active duty." "And?" "They want to debrief you first. Everything you saw behind enemy lines, positions, strength, movements, standard intelligence gathering." He paused. "But after that, yes. They'll put you back in the rotation. Your whole squad, if they're willing." Marek felt something loosen in his chest. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me. I think you're crazy." Sokolov took a long drag on his cigarette. "Most men who survive what you did, they're done. Mentally, if not physically. They need months to recover, and even then some never come back from it. We're not most men." "No," Sokolov agreed, studying him with those tired eyes. "You're not. Question is whether that makes you heroes or just too damaged to know better." Marek didn't have an answer to that, so he said nothing. "The debriefing is tomorrow at 0800. Get some sleep, Sergeant. You look like death." Sokolov walked away, leaving Marek alone with his cigarette and his thoughts. He stood there until the cigarette burned down to his fingers, then ground it out and went back inside. This time, somehow, sleep came. Morning arrived with the harsh clang of a metal triangle, the battalion's improvised alarm. Marek jolted awake, reaching for his rifle before remembering where he was. Around him, his squad did the same, all of them conditioned now to wake ready for violence. "Easy," Anton said, already up and dressed. "Just the breakfast call." They filed out to the field kitchen, where soldiers lined up for portions of watery porridge and black bread. It wasn't much, but after days of near starvation, it tasted like a feast. Marek ate mechanically, watching the other soldiers. They looked tired, worn down by the constant fighting. But there was an order to things here that had been absent behind enemy lines. Commanders issuing orders, supply lines functioning, the machinery of war grinding on. Volkov. A young lieutenant approached, clipboard in hand. "You're wanted at command. Bring your squad leaders." Marek grabbed Anton and Yuri, the closest thing he had to squad leaders, and they followed the lieutenant to what had been the farmhouse's main building. Inside, officers hunched over maps spread across a table, radios crackling with reports from the front. A colonel looked up as they entered, a hard-faced man in his 50s, his uniform rumpled but his eyes sharp. "Volkov?" "Yes, sir." "I'm Colonel Dragunov. Sit. Tell me everything." For the next 2 hours, Marek recounted their journey. The bombardment that had scattered them, the patrols they'd evaded or fought, the villages they'd seen occupied, the raid on the supply depot. Every detail he could remember, while the colonel and his intelligence officers asked questions, made notes, updated their maps with enemy positions. "This village here," one officer pointed at the map. "You said they had 4 trucks?" "At the time, yes, sir. That was 3 days ago." "And they were using it as a staging area for patrols?" "That's what it looked like." The officers exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them. The colonel leaned back in his chair, studying Marek with an intensity that made him want to squirm. "You did well, Sergeant, against considerable odds." "We did what we had to, sir. More than that, you showed initiative, adaptability. The raid especially. That took guts." Dragunov stood, walked to the window overlooking the defensive positions. "We need more of that. More aggressive action instead of just reacting to enemy movements." "Sir?" The colonel turned back to face him. "The front has stabilized, but barely. We're holding, but just. The enemy has superior numbers, better equipment, and momentum. What we have is knowledge of the terrain and soldiers who know how to fight in it." He paused. "Soldiers like you and your men." Marek felt something cold settle in his gut. "What are you proposing, sir?" "Captain Sokolov tells me you requested to rejoin active duty. I'm granting that request, but not in the way you expected." Dragunov returned to the map, his finger tracing lines behind enemy positions. "I want your squad to go back. Not as refugees this time, but as raiders, hit supply lines, disrupt communications, create chaos in their rear areas, make them afraid to move at night, to leave their fortifications." Anton stirred beside Marek. "With respect, sir, we're 10 men, against an army. 10 men who've already proven they can operate behind enemy lines. 10 men who know the terrain, who've survived what killed hundreds of others." The colonel's voice was hard. "I won't lie to you, it's dangerous, probably suicidal, but if you pull it off, you could tie down enemy resources, force them to divert troops from the front to protect their rear. Every truck you destroy, every convoy you ambush, is one less asset they can throw at our main line." "And if we refuse?" Marek asked quietly. "Then you're assigned to regular infantry duty on the line. No shame in that. You've earned the right to say no." Marek looked at Anton, then at Yuri. Both men's faces were unreadable, but he could see the calculation in their eyes. The line meant constant bombardment, human wave attacks, slow grinding death by attrition. The colonel's proposal meant mobility, initiative, and probably a shorter but more violent end. "I need to discuss this with my men," Marek said. "You have until 1800 hours. Dismissed." They walked back to the barn in silence. The rest of the squad looked up as they entered, reading the tension in their body language. "What happened?" Denise asked. Marek told them everything: the colonel's proposal, the mission parameters, the risks and potential rewards. As he spoke, he watched their faces, fear and excitement warring in equal measure. When he finished, Dmitri was the first to speak. "So we go from trying to escape enemy territory to deliberately sneaking back into it. That's insane." "It's also effective," Victor countered. "If we hit them where they're weak in their supply lines, we can do real damage. We can also get really dead." "We're going to get dead eventually anyway," Yuri said with the casual fatalism of the young. "At least this way we choose how." "I want to vote," Marek said. "This isn't like before. Before we were just trying to survive. This is volunteering to go back into hell. So everyone gets a say." They argued for an hour, voices rising and falling, opinions shifting. Some were eager for payback, for a chance to hit back instead of just enduring. Others were terrified, wanting nothing more than to stay behind the safety of friendly lines. In the end, it came down to a simple question that Anton posed. Would you rather die slowly on the line or quickly doing something that matters? The vote was 8-2 in favor. Dmitri and Nikolai were the holdouts, but when Marek said he'd understand if they wanted reassignment, both men shook their heads.
I'm not leaving the squad, Dmitri said grudgingly, even if you're all crazy. Nikolai just nodded, too nervous to speak, but his loyalty clear. At 1800 hours, Marek reported back to Colonel Dragunov. We're in, sir. The colonel smiled, though there was no warmth in it. Good. Training starts tomorrow. You've got 3 days to prepare, then you deploy. Those 3 days were a brutal crash course in guerrilla warfare. Demolitions experts taught them how to sabotage vehicles and bridges. Communications specialists showed them how to identify and cut enemy phone lines. They practiced night navigation, ambush tactics, and escape and evasion techniques. But the most valuable training came from a grizzled sergeant named Koslov, who'd fought as a partisan in the last war. Forget everything you know about conventional combat, Koslov told them on the first day. You're not soldiers anymore. You're ghosts. You hit fast, hard, and then you disappear before they can respond. Never stay to fight a pitched battle. Never take a position you can't abandon in 30 seconds. And never ever let them predict your movements. He taught them how to move silently in formation, how to use terrain for concealment, how to set up killing zones with minimal resources. More importantly, he taught them the mindset. Think like predators, not prey. Hunt instead of being hunted. On the third night, Colonel Dragunov called them together for a final briefing. Maps were spread out showing their area of operations, a 20-kilometer sector behind enemy lines, crisscrossed with roads and supply routes. Your primary targets are logistics, Dragunov explained. Fuel depots, ammunition dumps, supply convoys. Secondary targets are communications infrastructure, radio stations, telephone lines, courier routes. Tertiary targets are enemy personnel, but only when necessary for mission completion. Rules of engagement? Anton asked. There are no rules. You're operating in enemy territory against an occupying force. Use your judgment, but err on the side of mission success over humanitarian concerns. The words hung heavy in the air. Translation: do whatever it takes. You'll be resupplied every 10 days, Dragunov continued. We've established a dead drop location here. He pointed to a spot on the map where supplies will be cached. Ammunition, explosives, rations. If you miss a drop, you're on your own until the next one. Communication, Marek asked. Limited. You'll have a radio, but only for emergencies. Use it sparingly. Enemy signals intelligence is good. Written reports will be left at the drop point. Extraction plan? Dragunov was quiet for a moment. If things go wrong, you make your way back here. But understand, once you're across the line, we can't come get you. You're on your own. No safety net, no backup, just them against an army. Questions? Marek had 1,000, but the answers wouldn't change anything. No, sir. Then get some rest. You deploy at 0400. That night, Marek couldn't sleep again. He sat outside the barn, watching the stars, thinking about everything that had led them to this point. From scattered survivors trying to escape to a deliberate raiding force going back into the darkness. Second thoughts? Anton settled beside him. Third and fourth thoughts. We could still back out. Say we changed our minds. Could we? Could you? Anton was quiet, then shook his head. No. I think we're committed now. Not just to this mission, but to something bigger. We crossed a line back there when we decided to fight instead of hide. Can't uncross it. Sometimes I think about that old man, Marek said. The one shot in the village. Wonder if we're going to become just like the soldiers who killed him. Brutal, ruthless. There's a difference between brutality and necessity, Anton said. We're not killing for cruelty. We're killing to survive, to resist, to push back. That has to mean something. Does it? It has to. Otherwise, what are we even fighting for? Marek didn't answer. He wasn't sure he knew anymore. At 0400, they assembled in the pre-dawn darkness. Each man carried a rifle, a pistol, 200 rounds of ammunition,
4 days of rations, demolition charges, a combat knife, and whatever personal items they couldn't bear to leave behind. It wasn't much, but it was everything they needed. Colonel Dragunov saw them off personally, shaking each man's hand. "Make them pay," he said to Marek. "For every soldier we've lost, every village they've burned, every life they've destroyed. Make them pay." "Yes, sir." They moved out under cover of darkness, crossing back through the front lines via a carefully coordinated gap in the defenses. One moment they were in friendly territory, the next they were in no man's land. And then, with a final glance back at the positions they were leaving, they were behind enemy lines again. But this time it was different. This time they weren't lost. They weren't scattered refugees trying to survive. They were hunters with a mission, moving with purpose and deadly intent. The first target was a supply convoy scheduled to use the main road at dawn. Intelligence had provided the route, the timing, the probable strength of the escort. Marek's job was to hit it hard and disappear before reinforcements could arrive. They set up along a stretch of road that curved through dense forest, providing excellent cover and multiple escape routes. The demolition charges were placed at strategic points, connected to a detonator that Yuri held, with hands that shook slightly despite his confidence. "Contact in 5 minutes," Anton whispered, checking his watch. Marek positioned his men in a classic L-shaped ambush, the killing zone at the curve, support fire from the flanks. Every man knew his role, his sector of fire, his escape route. The sound of engines reached them first, growing louder. Then the convoy appeared around the bend, 3 trucks escorted by 2 light armored vehicles, exactly as intelligence had predicted. "Wait for it," Marek breathed, his finger on the trigger, adrenaline singing through his veins. "Wait!" The lead vehicle entered the kill zone. "Now!" Yuri twisted the detonator. The world erupted in fire and thunder as charges detonated under the lead and rear vehicles simultaneously, immobilizing the convoy. The middle truck, trapped between burning wrecks, screeched to a halt. "Fire!" 10 rifles opened up in a devastating crossfire. Soldiers poured from the trucks, trying to return fire, but they were silhouetted against the flames while Marek's squad fired from concealment. It was a slaughter, brutal and efficient. 30 seconds. That's how long the firefight lasted. Then Marek shouted, "Cease fire! Move!" They melted back into the forest, leaving the burning convoy behind, enemy soldiers dead or dying in the road. They ran for 5 minutes, following a pre-planned route, then stopped to listen. Silence. No pursuit. Not yet. "Casualties?" Marek asked. "None," Anton reported. "Clean hit." They'd done it. Their first deliberate raid, and it had worked exactly as planned. But as they continued moving deeper into enemy territory, Marek couldn't shake the image of those soldiers dying, caught in an ambush they never saw coming. They were the enemy, yes. They deserved it, probably. But they'd also been men, just like him, just like his squad. The difference was, his men had survived and theirs hadn't. That night, they made camp in a hidden ravine, posting guards in shifts. Around a small, carefully shielded fire, the squad was jubilant, riding the high of their success. "Did you see them?" Yuri was saying, his eyes bright with excitement. "They didn't know what hit them." 3 trucks, Dennis added. "That's a lot of supplies they won't be getting." Even Dmitri was smiling. "Maybe this isn't suicide after all. Maybe we can actually do this." But Victor was quiet, staring into the fire with a troubled expression. "What's wrong?" Marek asked him quietly. "Nothing, just that was too easy, almost like they wanted us to hit them." "You're being paranoid." "Maybe. Or maybe they're learning, adapting. We hit them once by surprise. Next time they'll be ready." Victor was right, of course. The enemy wasn't stupid. Every successful raid would make them more cautious, more prepared. The war was changing, and Marek's squad was changing with it. Over the next week, they hit 4 more convoys, destroyed 2 fuel depots, and cut communications lines in a dozen locations. Each raid was successful. Each time they slipped away before enemy reinforcements arrived. They were becoming what Colonel Dragunov had envisioned, ghosts in the night, striking without warning, fading without trace. But the cost was mounting in ways that had nothing to do with casualties. Marek could see it in his men's eyes, hear it in their voices. They were becoming harder, colder, more willing to do whatever it took to complete the mission. When they raided a small outpost and found a young enemy soldier hiding in a closet, terrified and unarmed, there was a moment where Marek had to decide: prisoner or witness? Mercy or security? He chose security. One bullet, quick and clean. Later, as they moved away from the silent outpost, Dennis asked, "Did we have to kill him? He wasn't even armed." "He'd seen our faces," Marek said flatly. "He could identify us, compromise future operations. He was just a kid. So are you, so is Yuri. Age doesn't matter in war." But it did matter. Marek knew it did. That soldier had been somebody's son, maybe somebody's brother, and now he was just another body, another name on the list of people Marek had killed for the mission. The missions continued. The successes piled up. And with each one, Marek felt a little more of himself dying, replaced by something else. Something necessary, but terrible. They were winning. But he wondered if winning this way meant they'd already lost something more important. The supply drop was late. Marek crouched in the darkness at the designated coordinates, checking his watch for the 5th time in as many minutes. They'd been operating behind enemy lines for 19 days now, and this was their second scheduled resupply. The first had been there waiting for them, buried in a shallow cache: ammunition, explosives, rations, medical supplies, everything they needed to continue the mission. This time, there was nothing but empty forest. "Maybe we're early," Yuri whispered beside him, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it. "We're not early. It's not here." Anton appeared from the tree line, moving with the fluid silence they'd all perfected. "Perimeter's clear. No sign of enemy activity, but also no sign of our supplies." Marek felt the familiar weight of command settling heavier on his shoulders. They had maybe 3 days of rations left, ammunition for one more serious engagement, and demolition charges for 2 targets at most. After that, they'd be operating on empty. "We wait until dawn," he decided. Maybe there was a delay. But dawn came with nothing but birdsong and the distant rumble of artillery. The cache site remained undisturbed, the earth showing no signs of recent digging. "They've forgotten about us," Dmitri said, his voice flat with resignation, "or written us off." "They haven't," Marek insisted, though doubt gnawed at him. "There's a reason. Communication breakdown, enemy interference, something. Or maybe the line collapsed again, and there's nobody left to send supplies," Victor said quietly. The thought had crossed all their minds, unspoken but persistent. They'd been so focused on their raids, so isolated in enemy territory, that they had no real knowledge of how the larger war was going. For all they knew, their entire army could have been routed, scattered, destroyed. "We continue the mission," Marek said with more confidence than he felt. "We have enough for at least 2 more operations. After that, we improvise." "Improvise with what?" Dmitri demanded. "We can't eat enemy bullets or blow up bridges with good intentions." "Then we take what we need from the enemy, like we did with the medical truck." The squad exchanged glances. Taking a medical truck in a moment of desperate opportunity was one thing. Deliberately raiding for supplies when they were already stretched thin was something else entirely. "That's a hell of a risk," Anton said carefully. "Every raid increases our exposure. Eventually our luck runs out." "Our luck already ran out when that bombardment hit us," Marek shot back. "Everything since then has been borrowed time. We use it the best way we can." They broke camp and moved deeper into the forest, heading toward a secondary target they'd been scouting, a small ammunition depot in a converted barn. Intelligence from their last resupply had marked it as lightly defended, a soft target perfect for their capabilities. But as they approached the site from different angles, something felt wrong. The barn was there, exactly where it should be. But the defenses had been significantly upgraded. Sandbag emplacements, machine gun positions, roving patrols with dogs. "They're expecting us," Anton breathed, surveying the scene through binoculars. Marek took the binoculars and confirmed what Anton had seen. This wasn't a lightly defended supply depot anymore. This was a trap, carefully baited and waiting to be sprung. "They've adapted," Victor said. "I told you they would." "Pull back," Marek ordered quietly. "Slow and careful. Don't give them any reason to think we're here." They withdrew like smoke, leaving no trace of their presence. Once they were a safe distance away, huddled in a dense thicket, the reality of their situation became impossible to ignore. They know our tactics, Anton said. They're reinforcing targets we might hit, setting up ambushes. How? Dennis asked. How could they know? They don't need to know specifically, Marek explained, his mind working through the tactical implications. They just need to recognize the pattern. We've hit supply lines, fuel depots, communications. They've hardened those targets and turned some into traps. So what do we do? Yuri's young face was tight with worry. Marek studied his map, considering their options. Every marked target now had to be assumed compromised, every raid potentially a suicide mission. But they still had their mission parameters, still had orders to disrupt enemy operations. We change our approach, he said slowly. They're expecting us to hit logistics and communications, so we hit something they're not protecting. Like what? Command and control. Marek's finger traced a route on the map. There's a forward headquarters here, about 8 kilometers north. They're coordinating local operations, probably including the hunt for us. Take it out, and we create chaos that's more valuable than blowing up another truck. Anton leaned in to study the map. That's going to be heavily defended. Officers, communications equipment, probably a full security detail. Which means they won't expect an attack. They're hunting for ghosts hitting supply convoys. They won't think we'd have the audacity to strike at their nerve center. Because it would be insane, Dmitri muttered. Exactly. So insane it might work. They spent the rest of the day conducting reconnaissance, observing the headquarters from concealed positions. The building had once been a minor administrative office, now surrounded by sandbags and barbed wire, guards at all approaches, radio antennas on the roof, vehicles parked in a motor pool adjacent to the main structure. Through binoculars, Marek counted at least 30 soldiers, possibly more inside. The odds were terrible, but the potential impact was enormous. We can't assault it directly, Anton said, stating the obvious. We'd be cut to pieces before we got within 50 meters. So we don't assault it, Marek replied. We create a diversion here, he pointed to the motor pool. Draw out their security, then hit the building while it's vulnerable. That still leaves us inside a fortified position with limited escape routes, which is why we time it for shift change, maximum confusion, personnel movement, attention divided. They planned through the night, working out every detail, every contingency. It was the most complex operation they'd attempted, and the margin for error was razor thin. But they were good at this now, hardened by weeks of survival and success. The attack was set for dawn, when the night shift would be tired and the day shift not yet fully alert, the transitional moment when defenses were weakest. At 05:30, Yuri and Dennis moved into position near the motor pool, carrying the last of their demolition charges. The rest of the squad positioned themselves in a loose semicircle around the headquarters building, ready to exploit whatever chaos erupted. Marek watched through the pre-dawn gloom as the first soldiers emerged from the building for shift change, yawning and talking among themselves. Guards at the gates were focused on the perimeter, not on the interior compound. Then Yuri's charges detonated. The motor pool erupted in a chain of explosions as fuel tanks ignited, sending fireballs climbing into the gray sky. Soldiers poured from the headquarters, running toward the flames, shouting orders, organizing firefighting efforts. Now! Marek hissed. His team moved like shadows, exploiting the chaos, slipping past distracted guards and into the building through a rear entrance that had been momentarily abandoned. Inside was pandemonium, radios crackling with confused reports, officers trying to understand what was happening, clerks running with papers and equipment. Marek led the way down a corridor, his rifle up, moving fast. They encountered a soldier coming around a corner and dropped him with suppressed shots before he could raise the alarm. Through a door marked with officers' insignia, they found what they were looking for: the operations room. Maps covered the walls, marked with positions and movements. A radio operator sat at his station, headphones on, completely focused on the emergency calls flooding in from the motor pool disaster. Anton moved silently behind him and delivered a blow that sent the operator slumping unconscious across his equipment. Victor and Alexei were already grabbing documents, maps, anything that looked important. 30 seconds, Marek warned, watching the door. They grabbed what they could carry, intelligence that could reshape their understanding of enemy operations, battle plans that would be worth their weight in ammunition to their command. Then they were moving again, back the way they'd come, the building still in chaos around them. They made it outside just as someone inside started screaming about intruders. Gunfire erupted behind them, bullets chipping concrete and whining off metal. Marek's squad scattered into the forest like water, each man following his designated escape route, the plan they'd rehearsed in the dark, hours before dawn. Marek ran with his lungs burning, his legs pumping, the captured documents clutched against his chest. Behind him, the headquarters compound was a hornet's nest of activity, soldiers mobilizing, vehicles starting up, the hunt beginning. The rendezvous point was 2 kilometers east, in a drainage culvert that would provide concealment while they regrouped. Marek reached it first, sliding down the muddy embankment and into the concrete pipe, his heart hammering so hard he could hear it in his ears. One by one, the others arrived. Anton, breathing hard but grinning. Victor, his wounded arm clutched against his side. Yuri and Denis, still smelling of explosive residue. 7, 8, 9. "Where's Alexei?" Marek demanded. They waited. 60 seconds, 2 minutes, 5. Alexei didn't come. "We have to go back," Dennis said urgently. "We can't," Anton said, his voice heavy. "You know we can't. The area will be crawling with search parties by now. He could be wounded, hiding, or captured, or dead." Marek forced the words out, each one like swallowing glass. "We can't risk 8 men for one, not when we're carrying intelligence this important. So we just leave him? We follow the mission protocol, exactly as we trained." Denis looked like he wanted to argue, wanted to rage against the cold logic of it. But he'd been a soldier long enough now to understand. In this war, sometimes there were no good choices, only survival and mission completion. They moved out, following a circuitous route designed to shake any pursuit. The documents they'd taken revealed enemy positions, supply routes, planned offensives, information that could save lives back at their own lines. But the cost of obtaining it sat heavy on Marek's conscience. That night, making camp in a cave system they'd used before, the squad was subdued. 9 men now. They'd lost Alexei, and the reality of their situation was becoming impossible to ignore. No resupply. Limited ammunition. Operating deeper behind enemy lines with an increasingly aware and hostile enemy hunting them. "We should consider extracting," Victor said quietly. "We've accomplished our mission. We've done damage. The intelligence we captured is valuable. We should get it back to command while we still can." "Our mission parameters were 2 weeks minimum," Dmitri countered, and the fact that he was arguing for continuing rather than retreating showed how much even he had changed. "We've been out 3. We keep going until we can't anymore." "I'm saying we're reaching that point," Victor insisted. "Look at us. We're down to 9 men, low on everything, being actively hunted. Pride won't keep us alive." "Neither will running every time things get hard," Yuri shot back. "Enough!" Marek's voice cut through the rising argument. "Victor's right that we're at a decision point, but we don't make that decision based on fear or pride. We make it based on tactical reality." He spread out the captured documents, studying them by the dim light of a shielded lantern. The enemy was planning a major push, consolidating forces for an offensive against the main defensive line. 3 divisions, heavily armored, with artillery support. "This changes everything," Anton said, reading over his shoulder. "If this offensive succeeds, the whole front could collapse." "Which means this intelligence needs to get back to command immediately," Victor said. "That's our new mission priority." Marek knew he was right. The documents they carried were more important than any raid they could conduct. But the nearest friendly lines were 40 kilometers west, through territory that would be thick with enemy forces preparing for their offensive. "We split up," he decided. 3 teams. One carries the documents and makes best speed for our lines. The other 2 create diversions, draw off pursuit, give the intelligence team the best chance of making it through. "That's a death sentence for the diversion teams," Denise said. "It's the mission. The intelligence has to get through, no matter the cost." The squad fell silent, each man understanding what was being asked. Some of them would die so that others could live, could complete the mission, could deliver information that might save hundreds or thousands of their comrades. "I'll lead the intelligence team," Anton said. Take Yuri and Denis. We're the fastest runners." "I'll take the north diversion," Victor volunteered. "Draw them away from your route." "And I'll take south," Dmitri added. "Make enough noise to wake the dead." Marek started to object, started to say that as commander he should be making these decisions, not having them made for him. But he saw the determination in their faces and realized something important. They weren't following his orders anymore out of obligation or hierarchy. They were making their own choices, owning their own fates. "All right," he said quietly. "We move at first light. Intelligence team goes first, 1 hour head start. Then the diversions launch simultaneously to draw maximum attention." They spent their last night together checking weapons, redistributing ammunition to whoever needed it most, sharing what little food remained. There was no grand speeches, no dramatic farewells, just soldiers preparing for what came next with the grim efficiency that had kept them alive this long. At dawn, Anton clasped Marek's forearm in the old warrior's grip. "Don't do anything stupid," he said. "That's my line." "Then we both better listen to it." Anton smiled, but his eyes were serious. "See you on the other side, Marek, one way or another." Marek watched as Anton, Yuri, and Denis disappeared into the gray morning, carrying documents that could change the course of the war. Then he turned to the 5 men who remained with him. "Time to make some noise," he said. They split into 2 groups, Victor leading Nikolai and Pavel north, while Marek took Dmitri south. The plan was simple. Create enough chaos to draw enemy attention away from Anton's route. Raid, harass, and generally make themselves the most tempting targets possible. For the next 12 hours, Marek and Dmitri became ghosts of destruction. They hit a fuel depot, setting fires that burned black and toxic. They ambushed a patrol, killing quickly and disappearing before reinforcements arrived. They cut communication lines and sabotaged roads, leaving a trail of chaos pointing deliberately away from where Anton's team was traveling. It worked almost too well. By evening, they could hear the sounds of large forces mobilizing, search parties fanning out, the enemy responding with overwhelming force to the threat in their rear. "We've got their attention," Dmitri observed, breathing hard after their latest sprint from pursuit. "Now we just have to stay alive long enough for Anton to get through," Marek replied. But staying alive was becoming increasingly difficult. The enemy wasn't just searching anymore. They were hunting with purpose, using tactics designed specifically to counter guerrilla fighters, blocking escape routes, flooding areas with troops, using aerial reconnaissance that made daylight movement nearly impossible. On the second day, Marek and Dmitri were pinned down in a rocky outcrop by 2 platoons of enemy soldiers. They fought from cover, making every shot count, but the enemy had unlimited ammunition and unlimited patience. "We're not getting out of this one," Dmitri said matter-of-factly, reloading his rifle with his last magazine. "We've gotten out of worse." "Have we?" Dmitri laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "I don't think we have, actually. This is it, Marek, the end of the line." Marek wanted to argue, to offer some tactical miracle that would save them. But Dmitri was right. They'd used up all their luck, all their skill, all their borrowed time. The enemy was closing in from 3 sides, and there was nowhere left to run. "If we're going out," Dmitri said, "let's make it count for something. Give Anton even more time." "How?" Dmitri's grin was fierce and slightly unhinged. "We charge them. Full assault. They'll never expect it, and it'll take them time to reorganize after. Time Anton can use." It was insane. It was suicide. It was also exactly the kind of audacious move that had kept them alive this long. "On 3, Marek said, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Wait." Dmitri turned to look at him, really look at him. "I was wrong about you back at the beginning. Thought you were just another sergeant playing at command, but you became something real, something worth following." "Dmitri, let me finish. Whatever happens, whether Anton makes it or not, what we did here mattered. We mattered. That's more than most soldiers get to say." Marek nodded, his throat tight. "It's been an honor, Dmitri." "Honor." Dmitri tasted the word. "Yeah, I suppose it has been." He checked his rifle one last time. "Now let's show these bastards what that honor looks like. 1. They tensed, ready to spring from cover. 2. Marek thought of Anton and Yuri and Denis, hopefully kilometers away by now, hopefully safe. Thought of the 23 men he'd started with and the price paid for survival and resistance. 3! They erupted from the rocks, firing as they ran, screaming defiance at the enemy positions. The world became muzzle flashes and the crack of bullets and the roar of blood in his ears. Marek saw soldiers diving for cover, saw the shock on their faces at this impossible frontal assault. He made it 10 meters before something slammed into his leg, spinning him around. He hit the ground hard, his rifle flying from his hands. Pain exploded through his entire body, white-hot and consuming. Through the haze of agony, he saw Dmitri still running, still firing, his voice raised in something between a war cry and a laugh. Then Dmitri jerked, stumbled, but kept moving forward. Another impact, and another, and finally he fell, his rifle clattering across the rocks. Marek tried to crawl toward him, but his leg wouldn't work, wouldn't respond to commands. The world was fading at the edges, darkness creeping in. The last thing he heard before consciousness left him was the sound of boots approaching, voices speaking in the enemy's language, and somewhere very distant, the fading echo of artillery that might have been his own forces, or might have been just his dying brain's imagination. Then nothing but darkness and the strange peace that comes when there are no more choices to make, no more burdens to carry. Just the end, finally, mercifully arriving. Pain dragged Marek back to consciousness like fishhooks in his flesh. He surfaced slowly, awareness returning in fragments. The sharp throb in his leg, the rough fabric beneath his cheek, the smell of antiseptic and unwashed bodies. His eyes opened to dim light filtering through a barred window, and for a disorienting moment he couldn't place where he was or how he'd gotten there. Then memory crashed back. The last stand. Dmitri falling, the approaching boots. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. White-hot agony lanced through his left leg, forcing a strangled gasp from his throat. Looking down, he saw crude bandages wrapped around his thigh, already stained brown with old blood. "Easy." The voice came from nearby, speaking his language with a heavy accent. "You move too fast, you tear stitches." Marek's head snapped toward the sound, his hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. An enemy soldier sat on a stool near the door, a rifle across his knees, watching him with tired eyes. "Where am I?" "Prisoner holding facility. You've been unconscious 2 days." The guard gestured at Marek's leg. "Bullet went through. You're lucky. Missed the bone, missed the artery. You get to keep the leg. Maybe. 2 days. Marek's mind raced, calculating. Anton and his team would have had enough time to reach friendly lines, assuming they'd made it. The diversion had worked, at least in that regard. "My friend," Marek said, "the one who was with me, is he—" The guard shook his head. "Dead before he hit the ground. Brave, though. Crazy, but brave." He paused. "You both were. Charging 2 platoons with no support, no chance. Respect for that, even if you are the enemy." Dmitri was dead. Marek had known it, had watched him fall, but hearing the confirmation still hit like a physical blow. Another name for the list. Another life spent buying time for the mission. "What happens now?" Marek asked. "Interrogation, eventually. Right now, Command is more interested in hunting your friends than questioning you." The guard lit a cigarette, offered one to Marek, who shook his head. "You've caused significant problems. 12 raids, 3 fuel depots destroyed, a headquarters compromised. They're very eager to catch the rest of your unit." Marek kept his face neutral, showing nothing. If they were still hunting, that meant they hadn't caught Anton's team yet. That was something at least. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of pain and isolation. Guards came and went. Occasionally, a doctor would check his wound, changing bandages with rough efficiency. Food arrived, thin soup and hard bread, barely enough to keep him alive but not enough to restore strength. On the 4th day, they moved him. 2 guards hauled him from the cell and half-carried, half-dragged him down corridors and into a small room with a table and 2 chairs. They dumped him in one chair and left, locking the door behind them. Marek sat alone for what felt like hours, his wounded leg throbbing, his mind working through scenarios. Interrogation was coming. They'd want to know about his unit, their capabilities, their base of operations. He'd been trained to resist, to give only name and rank, but training and reality were different things. The door opened and an officer entered. a major by his insignia, middle-aged with sharp features and calculating eyes. He carried a folder which he set on the table before sitting across from Marek. "Sergeant Marek Volkov," the major said, reading from the folder. "2nd Battalion, Echo Company. The battalion that was destroyed 3 weeks ago in the bombardment." He looked up. "Yet, here you are, along with several others who've been making life difficult for us." Marek said nothing. "You understand your situation, yes? You're a prisoner. No rescue is coming. Your war is over." The major opened the folder, revealing photographs. "We've identified some of your unit: Corporal Anton Petrov, Private Yuri Malikov, Private Denis Kovar. These 3 were spotted 2 days ago, moving west toward your lines." Marek's heart lurched, but he kept his expression flat. 2 days ago. That meant they were still trying to get through, still carrying the intelligence. "They won't make it," the major continued. "We have patrols saturating the area, aerial reconnaissance. It's only a matter of time." He leaned forward. "But you could help them. Tell me their route, their destination, and I can ensure they're captured alive rather than killed. A kindness to your friends." "Name and rank," Marek said quietly. "That's all you're getting." The major sighed. "I expected that. Loyalty is admirable, even misplaced loyalty." He closed the folder. "You'll talk eventually. They all do. Pain has a way of making ideals seem less important than relief." But the major didn't order torture. Instead, he left, and the guards returned to take Marek back to his cell. The interrogation, it seemed, would be a war of attrition rather than immediate brutality. Over the next week, the pattern repeated: questions, refusals, veiled threats. The major was patient, trying different approaches, appealing to logic, to self-preservation, to concern for his men. Marek gave nothing, clinging to the training and to the stubborn core of resistance that had kept him alive through everything else. But the isolation was grinding him down. His leg was healing slowly, infection kept at bay by grudging medical care, but his mind was suffering. No contact with anyone except guards and interrogators. No knowledge of what was happening in the wider war. No way to know if Anton had made it, if the sacrifice had meant anything. On the 10th day of his captivity, everything changed. Marek woke to the sound of distant explosions, the building shaking with concussive force. Artillery, his experienced ears told him. Heavy bombardment, close and getting closer. Guards ran past his cell, shouting orders, the facility transforming from prison to combat zone in moments. He pulled himself to the barred window, peering out at the gray dawn. On the horizon, smoke and fire, the distinctive crump of incoming shells, and underneath it all, the rattle of small arms fire. An attack. Someone was attacking. Hope surged through him, dangerous and intoxicating. His forces? A rescue? Or just a coincidental battle that would see him crushed between opposing armies? The bombardment intensified, shells falling closer, the building shuddering. Somewhere, glass shattered. Someone was screaming. The organized chaos of a military facility was dissolving into pure panic. Then the door to his cell burst open. Not a guard, but a soldier, young and terrified, fumbling with keys. "You need to go," the soldier said in Marek's language, his accent so thick it was almost incomprehensible. "They're coming. Everyone is running. If they find you here—" He didn't finish, just threw the cell door wide and ran. Marek didn't waste time questioning it. He hauled himself upright, his wounded leg screaming protest, and hobbled toward the door. The corridor outside was chaos. Guards abandoning posts, officers shouting contradictory orders, the whole structure of command breaking down. He moved with the flow of panic, just another figure in the confusion, making his way toward where he hoped was an exit. His leg was agony, each step a fresh torture, but he pushed through it. Pain was temporary, capture was forever. A guard spotted him, recognition flashing across his face. He raised his rifle, shouting. Marek threw himself sideways as the shot went wide, crashing through a doorway into what had been an office. Papers scattered, chairs overturned. He grabbed a letter opener from the desk. Pathetic as weapons went, but better than nothing. The guard followed, but before he could fire again, an explosion tore through the ceiling above them. Debris rained down, the guard disappearing under falling rubble. Marek covered his head, ears ringing, then scrambled over the wreckage toward daylight streaming through a hole in the wall. He emerged into morning air thick with smoke and cordite. The facility was under full assault, shells falling in systematic patterns, enemy soldiers, his enemy anyway, retreating in disorder. And advancing from the west, infantry in familiar uniforms, his uniforms, pushing forward with rifles blazing. Marek stumbled toward them, waving his arms, shouting identification. A squad spotted him, weapons coming up, then recognition as they saw the uniform under the grime and blood. "Wounded man here," someone shouted. "Medic!" Hands grabbed him, lowering him to the ground. A medic appeared, checking his leg with quick efficiency. Around them, the battle continued, but Marek was beyond it now, the adrenaline draining away and leaving only exhaustion. "You're going to be fine," the medic said. "Lucky day for you, Sergeant. We almost didn't attack this sector." "How?" Marek's voice was hoarse. "How did you know to come here?" "Intelligence. Best damn intelligence we've gotten in months. Some sergeant showed up 4 days ago with documents detailing enemy positions, supply lines, everything. Command used it to plan this whole offensive." Anton. Anton had made it through. "The sergeant who brought the intelligence," Marek managed. "Is he alive, last I heard? Got himself and 2 others through 40 kilometers of enemy territory. They're calling it a miracle." The medic finished wrapping a fresh bandage. "Command wants to talk to him about how they did it. Some kind of commendation coming." Relief washed over Marek so powerfully it left him weak. They'd made it. The mission had succeeded. Everything they'd sacrificed, everyone they'd lost. It had meant something. They evacuated him to a field hospital 5 kilometers behind the new front line. The offensive was succeeding, pushing the enemy back, retaking ground that had been lost. And it was all built on the intelligence Anton had delivered, purchased with blood and desperation. Marek spent 3 days in the field hospital before they moved him to a proper medical facility further back. His leg was healing well, the doctors said, though he'd walk with a limp for the rest of his life. Small price to pay for survival. On the 4th day, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway of the ward. Anton looked older than Marek remembered, harder, worn down by the same experiences that had marked them all. But he was alive, and the grin that split his bearded face was genuine. "You indestructible bastard," Anton said, pulling up a chair beside Marek's bed. "I heard you were captured. Then I heard about the offensive hitting that facility. Had to see for myself if you'd actually made it." "Barely," Marek clasped his friend's forearm. "But here I am, thanks to you making it through." "Thanks to all of us," Anton corrected. "Denise, Yuri, and I, we wouldn't have made it if you and the others hadn't drawn off the pursuit. Victor's team either. Every sacrifice mattered." "Victor's team made it?" "2 of them, Victor and Pavel. They linked up with our lines 3 days after we did. Nikolai didn't make it." Anton's expression darkened. "But because Victor and Pavel hit the north so hard, they pulled forces away from our route. Everyone's contribution counted. 6 survivors out of 23. The mathematics were brutal, but Marek had learned to accept brutal mathematics. They were alive because others had died. That was the currency of war." "I heard about your charge," Anton continued. "The guards who survived it, they're talking about it. 2 men against 2 platoons. They're calling it either the bravest or the stupidest thing they've ever seen. Dmitri came up with it. Figured if we were going out, we'd make it count. He always was contrary." Anton smiled sadly. "Remember when we first got scattered? He was ready to give up, hide in a hole until it all blew over. People change. War changes them. War changed all of us." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of shared experience binding them more surely than words ever could. "What happens now?" Marek asked finally. "Command wants to debrief us. Learn what worked, what didn't. They're talking about forming specialized units based on our tactics, small teams operating behind enemy lines." Anton paused. "They want to know if we'd be interested in leading the training. Training others to do what we did? Passing on what we learned. How to survive, how to fight, how to resist when everything says you should quit." Anton leaned back. "It's not the front line. It's not glory. But it's useful. Important." Marek considered.
Part of him wanted nothing more than to walk away from the war entirely, to find some quiet place and never pick up a weapon again. But another part, the part forged in forests and firefights, in impossible choices and desperate stands, knew he couldn't. Too many had died to get them here. 13 from his original squad. Alexei and Dmitri and Nikolai from the raids, all those names, all those faces. They deserved more than to be forgotten, more than to have their sacrifices fade into the anonymous carnage of war. "I'll do it," he said, "on one condition." "What's that?" "We make sure they understand it's not about glory or heroics. It's about survival and mission completion, about making hard choices and living with them. No romanticism, no propaganda. Just the truth of what it costs." Anton nodded slowly. "Agreed. The truth. That's the least we owe them." Over the next weeks, as Marek's leg healed and the offensive continued to roll forward, he and Anton worked with command to develop training protocols. They brought in Victor and Pavel, Denise and Yuri, pooling their collective experience into a curriculum that was ruthlessly practical. They taught small unit tactics and field improvisation, escape and evasion, how to read terrain, how to move unseen, how to strike fast and fade faster. But more than tactics, they taught mindset, the mental toughness required to operate in isolation, the decision-making under pressure, the ability to keep moving forward when every instinct screamed to quit. Word of their exploits had spread through the ranks, the squad that had survived behind enemy lines, that had conducted 12 successful raids, that had delivered the intelligence that turned the tide. Soldiers looked at them with a mixture of awe and envy. But Marek made sure to correct that narrative whenever he could. In briefings, in training sessions, in quiet conversations, he told the real story. Not about heroes, but about scared men making the best of impossible circumstances. About the cost of survival measured in friends lost and moral compromises made. "You want to know the secret to what we did?" he told one group of trainees. "It's simple. We didn't quit. That's all. When quitting was the logical choice, the rational choice, we chose to keep going instead. Not because we were brave, because we were too stubborn or too stupid to recognize when we were beaten." He told them about the old man shot in the village, about the choices they'd made to prioritize mission over mercy, about the young enemy soldier he'd killed in the outpost, about the weight that those decisions carried, the price that survival demanded. "If you do this," he said, "you'll come back different. If you come back at all, you'll do things you never thought you could do, become someone you never thought you'd be. And you'll have to live with that person for the rest of your life. So before you volunteer for this, before you think it's going to be some grand adventure, understand what you're really signing up for." Some still volunteered, some walked away. Marek respected both choices. Months passed. The war ground on, shifting and evolving. The offensive launched with Anton's intelligence had driven the enemy back significantly, stabilizing the front and reclaiming lost territory. New specialized units trained in guerrilla tactics were operating behind enemy lines now, using the lessons Marek and his survivors had learned the hard way. Winter arrived, snow covering the world in white. Marek stood at the window of the training facility, watching flakes fall, his wounded leg aching with the cold. The limp was permanent, the doctors had confirmed, but he could still walk, still function, more than many could say. Anton joined him at the window, 2 cups of weak coffee in hand. He passed one to Marek. "Thinking about them?" Anton asked quietly. Marek didn't need to ask who he meant. "Always, especially when it snows. Remember that night we crossed the river? Thought we were going to freeze to death before we drowned. Leonid did, and Sokolov, and all the others." Marek sipped the terrible coffee. "Sometimes I wonder if we survived because we were better, or just luckier. Does it matter? Maybe not, but I think about it anyway." They watched the snow fall in silence. 2 soldiers who'd seen too much, survived too much, carrying the weight of those who hadn't. "I got a letter yesterday," Anton said, "from Yuri's family, thanking me for keeping him alive, for bringing him home when so many didn't come back." "What did you tell them?" "The truth, that their son was braver than anyone had a right to be, that he saved my life more than once, that I'm alive because of him and others like him." Anton paused. I didn't tell them about the fear or the things we had to do. Just that he mattered, that what we did mattered. Did it? Marek asked. Matter? Anton turned to look at him directly. Yes, the intelligence we delivered prevented a major enemy offensive, saved thousands of lives. The tactics we developed are being used successfully across the front. The enemy has had to divert significant resources to protect their rear areas, weakening their main force. He paused. But more than that, we proved something. That soldiers can survive the impossible if they refuse to accept defeat. That small actions can have large consequences. That will and determination can bend fate. At what cost? A high one. Too high. Anton's voice was heavy. But that's war. The cost is always too high. The question is whether what you buy with it is worth the price. Marek didn't have an answer to that. Maybe there wasn't one. Maybe the only thing you could do was keep moving forward. Keep trying to make the sacrifice mean something. Keep honoring the dead by living the best way you knew how. Spring came eventually, as it always did, thawing the frozen ground and bringing new growth. The war continued, but the tide had shifted. The enemy was in retreat, their logistics disrupted, their rear areas insecure, their command uncertain. The specialized units operating behind their lines were taking a toll that went beyond simple body count. They were destroying confidence, creating paranoia, making every supply convoy a potential ambush. Marek's contribution to that was indirect now, through the soldiers he trained and the tactics he developed. But he could see the results in the reports that came back, in the success stories and the casualty lists that were shorter than they would have been otherwise. On a warm day in May, 8 months after the bombardment that had started everything, Marek received orders to report to divisional headquarters. He made the journey with Anton, both of them curious about what command wanted. They were shown into an office where Colonel Dragunov waited, looking older and more tired than Marek remembered, but still carrying himself with military bearing. "Gentlemen," Dragunov said, gesturing them to seats, "thank you for coming." "Sir," they responded in unison. Dragunov opened a folder on his desk. "I wanted to inform you personally, your squad's actions have been officially recognized. Commendations for all surviving members. Posthumous decorations for those who fell." "That's not necessary, sir," Marek said quietly. "Perhaps not, but it's deserved." Dragunov closed the folder. "More importantly, the tactics you developed, the training you've provided, it's making a real difference. We're winning this war, gentlemen. Slowly, at great cost, but winning nonetheless. And a significant part of that success traces back to what you and your men accomplished." Marek exchanged glances with Anton. Winning. It was strange to hear that word applied to something that had felt like nothing but survival and loss. "There's something else," Dragunov continued. "The war won't last forever. When it ends, there will be a need for men who understand asymmetric warfare, who can train others, who can think creatively about military problems. I'm offering you both positions in the peacetime army, permanent rank, teaching positions at the military academy." It was a generous offer, a way to continue serving without returning to the front. Marek should have been grateful, should have accepted immediately, but he found himself hesitating. "Can I think about it, sir?" he asked. "Of course. Take your time." Dragunov stood, extending his hand. "Whatever you decide, know that your service has been exemplary. The army is better for having soldiers like you." Walking back from headquarters, Anton said, "You're not going to take it, are you?" "I don't know. Maybe. Probably not." Marek struggled to articulate what he was feeling. "I've been fighting for so long, I'm not sure I know how to stop. But I'm also not sure I want to keep teaching others to do what we did. The cost? I know." Anton was quiet for a moment. "I'm not taking it either. I think when this ends, I need to walk away completely. Find something that has nothing to do with war or fighting or death." "What will you do?" "No idea. Farm, maybe. Build things instead of destroying them. Something that creates instead of kills." He smiled slightly. "Probably bore myself to death within a year." "Probably," Marek agreed, "but it might be worth trying." They walked in companionable silence, two survivors contemplating a future neither had expected to see. The war did end, eventually.
Not with a dramatic climax, but with a gradual winding down as the enemy's will and resources finally broke. Treaties were signed, borders were drawn. The machinery of peace, as grinding and impersonal as the machinery of war, began its work. Marek attended the memorial service for his fallen comrades, all 13 from the original squad, plus Alexei, Dmitri, and Nikolai, who'd fallen during the raids. Their names were carved into stone alongside thousands of others, individual identity dissolving into collective sacrifice. He stood before those names for a long time, remembering faces, voices, moments. Lieutenant Stasov lying dead in the first bombardment, Leonid bleeding out in the forest, Dmitri charging the enemy positions with a laugh on his lips. All of them gone, all of them irreplaceable. "We did it," he said quietly to the stone. "We survived. We won. I hope that means something. I hope it was worth what you gave." The stone, of course, offered no answers. Victor found him there, the older soldier also limping now from wounds accumulated over months of fighting. "They're having a gathering," Victor said. "All the survivors of special operations units, drinking, telling stories, the usual." "You going? For a while? Thought you might want to come." Marek considered declining, then decided he owed it to the dead to celebrate with the living. "Yeah, let's go." The gathering was in a veterans' hall, crowded with men who'd operated behind enemy lines in various capacities. Marek recognized some faces, heard familiar stories embellished with time and alcohol. The atmosphere was strange, celebration mixed with melancholy, survival guilt dressed up as camaraderie. Anton was there, along with Yuri and Denise and Pavel. They'd all survived, though carrying scars both visible and hidden. They greeted Marek with genuine warmth, these men who'd shared the worst experiences of their lives and somehow come through the other side. "To the fallen," Anton said, raising his glass. "To the fallen," they echoed, drinking. "And to the stubborn bastards who refused to die," Yuri added with a grin. They drank to that too. As the night wore on, the crowd thinned. Eventually, it was just Marek's original squad survivors sitting around a table, the conversation drifting from light to serious. "Do you think about it?" Denise asked. "About whether we did the right things?" "Every day," Marek admitted. "The choices we made, the prices we paid, whether different decisions would have saved more lives or cost us everything. I dream about that village sometimes," Yuri said quietly. "The one where they shot the old man. Wonder if we could have saved him." "We couldn't," Anton said firmly. "Not without dying ourselves. Sometimes there are no good choices, just less bad ones." "That's supposed to make it easier?" Dennis asked. "No, but it's the truth." They sat in silence for a moment, each wrestling with their own ghosts. "I've been offered a teaching position," Marek said, "at the military academy, turning it down." "Why?" Victor asked. "Because I don't want to create more soldiers who have to carry what we carry. Don't want to train more kids to make the choices we made." He paused. "The war's over. I need to find a way to be something other than a soldier." "What will you do?" "Don't know yet. But something that builds instead of destroys, something that creates instead of kills." "That's what I've been saying," Anton said, "though I still have no idea what that looks like practically." "We'll figure it out," Marek said. "We figured out how to survive impossible odds. We can figure out how to live in peacetime." They talked deep into the night, making loose plans, sharing fragile hopes. The bond between them was unbreakable, forged in shared trauma and collective survival. They would scatter eventually, return to different lives, build different futures. But they would always have this, always have each other. As Marek walked home in the pre-dawn light, his leg aching but his mind clearer than it had been in months, he thought about the journey that had brought him here. From that first bombardment to the desperate flight through enemy territory to the raids and the capture and the eventual victory. 23 men had started that journey. 6 had finished it. The cost had been devastating. The moral compromises haunted him, but they'd survived when survival seemed impossible. They'd fought when fighting seemed futile. They'd refused to quit when quitting was the logical choice. And somehow, impossibly, that refusal had mattered, had changed things, had bent fate just enough to make a difference. Was it worth the price? Marek didn't know. Maybe that wasn't a question that could be answered. Maybe all you could do was carry the weight of what you'd done and try to make the rest of your life mean something. He thought about Dimitri's last words, about honor and meaning and mattering. Thought about the old man in the village and the young soldier in the outpost and all the other ghosts that would walk with him forever. The war had changed him, stripped away illusions and comfortable lies, forced him to become someone harder and more capable and less innocent than he'd been before. He couldn't undo that. Couldn't go back to who he'd been. But he could go forward, could choose what he did with the life he'd been given, the life purchased with so much sacrifice. That, ultimately, was the only victory that mattered. Not medals or commendations or recognition, but the choice to keep living, keep trying, keep fighting for something better, even when you'd seen the worst. The choice to stand when it would be easier to fall. The choice that had defined him and his men from the moment they'd refused to surrender in those dark forests behind enemy lines. And as the sun rose over the peaceful city, Marek made that choice again. To stand, to move forward, to honor the fallen by living well. The war was over. But the fight to make it mean something, that fight would continue for the rest of his life. And unlike the enemy they'd faced, unlike the odds they'd beaten, that was a fight he knew how to win. One day at a time, one choice at a time, one step forward when everything said to step back. That was the real lesson of those weeks behind enemy lines. Not tactics or techniques, but the fundamental truth that will and determination could overcome almost anything. That as long as you refused to quit, as long as you kept moving forward, you had a chance. And sometimes, against all odds, that chance was enough. Marek walked home, the morning sun warm on his face, carrying the weight of 13 names and the responsibility of 6 lives, knowing that both would shape everything he did for whatever time remained to him. It was a heavy burden, but it was one worth carrying, because they'd mattered, all of them, every choice, every sacrifice, every impossible stand. They'd mattered, and that made all the difference. Made